My name's Andy Loschiavo. I am the Restoration Resources Section Chief here. I'm going to talk about the National Environmental Policy Act process, NEPA. No, it's not the filter in the vacuum cleaner. It's an important act where we considered a lot of the environmental issues and socioeconomic issues and why we're here tonight. This is part of the NEPA process, the public scoping meeting. And so we're going to go through this and sort of the things, how this process works, and the opportunities for you to provide input on this project. NEPA is a federal law that mandates all federal actions to consider the environmental effects, socioeconomic effects of those actions. And it's mostly focused on major federal actions, and particularly focused on those where we might have significant environmental impacts. As part of the process, it requires, as part of this process tonight, this is one part of it, to consider, solicit public comment, consider those comments, and address those as part of the project that we're putting forth. It's also a way where we're able to integrate our consultation with tribal governments, as well as our coordination and consultation with federal, state, and local agencies. It's an important process to provide a mechanism where a lot of different agencies and issues that get brought up that overlap in this area, we can look at it all in one document, consider all those issues as we're looking to formulate the best restoration plan that can avoid, minimize, and mitigate some of those environmental effects. And this is a detailed diagram here of the process here. What we're basically talking about here is ultimately, as part of this process, we prepared a detailed assessment to consider what those effects are and measures to avoid, minimize, and mitigate unavoidable effects. And there's different types of documents. The one that's most important is that we're going to be considering with this project, because we believe that there's enough issues here already that's part of how we look at CERP projects. It's a large-scale project. There's a lot of important resources that we would prepare a more detailed environmental assessment as part of an environmental impact statement. And we consider a lot of those environmental issues and document them clearly and have explained the analyses in that report. There's a draft report that goes out for public comment, and a final that gets posted as well. Now, Kelly mentioned the planning process, and there's this also NEPA process. We try to integrate those. We're trying to make sure that we make things as integrated as possible. As part of the core 6-step planning process, the first step for any restoration project or any water resources project is what are those problems and opportunities that we're trying to address, and focus in on what are the goals and objectives. Some of you may have some insight on that or some views, and you can express that tonight as part of the scoping process. It's very much feeds into clearly stating what is the purpose of this federal project and why we need it. We're going to make sure that it's clearly stated ultimately in the document, so there's no confusion over what is the purpose and need for the project. In addition to the planning process, we try to describe what the existing conditions are. What is the vegetation that's out there, the geology, the hydrology, the fish and wildlife that's out there? What's the recreation that people use these sites for? What are the communities that are in this area? We want to make sure we consider all those issues as part of the affected environment. And we also try to consider, ultimately, well, what if we didn't move forward with this project? What would happen? What is the future going to be like? And that's the no action alternative that we consider. As part of the planning process, ultimately, when you're considering these problems and opportunities, you develop alternative plans to address them. Alternative restoration plans. They aren't just focused on that restoration action. They may look at opportunities for water supply or control that can be done along with those restoration plans. But also if there's environmental issues or effects to cultural resources, we want to consider measures to avoid, minimize, and mitigate those. And we want to hear some of those concerns tonight, as well as part of this process. As part of the process to evaluate plans, we develop what are called performance measures. We're trying to measure the benefits for restoration. How much wetlands do we restore? How much water are we able to move south? Do we know how much fire risk we can reduce? Those are the performance measures that we help evaluate the plan's effects, as well as we look at evaluation criteria to consider what impacts might be to threatened endangered species, as well as trying to avoid sensitive cultural areas. We then take that information, it's compared in the document, the joint project implementation report and NEPA report. And as part of that, we document what those environmental effects are. And ultimately, we select a plan that's put forth that's a tentatively selected plan with a draft environmental impact statement. Basically describes this is what we think is the best plan that considers all the issues that got raised as part of this project. It also documents ultimately the conclusions in the end with the final report and how those issues were addressed. What's new with the planning process is some of the feedback back a few years ago when they asked how was the Corps doing with the planning process, comments were you're too slow, it costs a lot to get through the planning process, and so there's a whole effort to revamp the planning process, to speed it up, to try and minimize the cost for going through the planning process. So we're talking about 3 years to get the study done, no more than $3 million to develop this the project plan, and also improved integration within the Corps of Engineers, the Jacksonville district, the Corps representatives on the ground. We have a division level and ultimately up at the national level in headquarters, better coordination between those groups to ultimately make sure we address issues fully, get support ultimately at headquarters for the plan. The process is also focused on what are those key decisions we need to make. As we talked about those 6 steps in the planning process, what are the key decisions that we need to make, and what are those key risks that we might run into, whether it's water quality, or maybe it's seepage issues, or flood control, or threatened endangered species issues that we need to address. Getting the right information at the right time to address them. And ultimately, we're trying to document what these issues are at the beginning and get the right information at the right time so that we can move through the process as fast as we can, but appropriately address those issues. And here's sort of an overarching schedule. This whole process, again, take about 3 years. As you can see up here, we're starting in the scoping process. That's where we're at. There was a scoping letter that went out on July 11th, and we're having a scoping meeting tonight to hear comments from everyone who's in this room. And you can also send in writing the comments or an email. I'll have some information at the end on how you can do that. That information gets taken in by the project team. They develop alternatives to basically come up with, these are alternatives we're going to consider for restoration in the Western Everglades, and that's the first decision milestone that we make. When that process moves forward, we go through an evaluation process to identify what we think is the tentatively selected plan. It's not the recommended plan because we still have to hear from all the various agencies and public and tribal governments on what we think are some things that need to be considered in that plan, and have they all been considered correctly. And that gets done as part of a draft environmental impact statement, a draft PIR that goes out for public comment. So that's another opportunity for folks to weigh in on what we think is what the agencies have come up as a restoration plan, but also to provide their input on that. And we consider that. we consider what changes we need to make to avoid, minimize, or mitigate some of those unavoidable impacts. And it gets put into ultimately a final plan that comes out in the decision 4 here, the final report milestone. We have a final EIS, environmental impact statement, or EIS, they call it, that gets released. And ultimately, in the end, there's a final record of decision of that on that project after a final state agency review. Public participation is a big deal as part of the NEPA process and the federal planning process. There's many opportunities to do that with this project. One, we're trying to use existing forums that are out there, the South Florida Ecosystem Restoration Task Force. There's a meeting that's being held here in this auditorium on August 23rd, and it's a good way to hear your thoughts, more interactive way, talking through some of the technical information that we may need that can help improve the consideration of what are the best plans to evaluate. And we're also going to use our project delivery team meetings. They're going to be, those meetings are going to be posted on the website. That again is going to be in the presentation. You can write this down. And those are held basically monthly, and there's opportunities for public comment as part of that process. In addition, things are going to be brought up at the Water Resource Advisory Committee to the South Florida Water Management District. And as part of the governing board, there's opportunities for public comment there. And again, when we have a draft report that comes out, we'll have another public meeting to hear input on those restoration plans. And so again, there's a number of ways to get your input into this process. There's public comment cards that we mentioned. We have some up front here that Gina's going to call up names for people to come up. And if you don't want to use that route, you can send comments through an email that's up on the screen here, western.everglades@usac.army.mil. Or you can write an address to Melissa Nasuti. She's the environmental technical lead. She's going to be here tonight using this address here. And again, the web address to keep up on the public comments, when things are going to be addressed. Once we address those comments, they'll be posted on this website, as well as project team meetings, upcoming events. Use that website. And we're accepting comments up through August 24th. So you have another week after today to get your input on this project.
And some folks were trying to get to that web page tonight and weren't able to get through to it for some reason. We know that it's case sensitive. If you can't get through on that address, you can just go to Google and type in Western Everglades Restoration Project and just Google it, and it will lead you to our web page.
All right, thank you.
Okay, thank you to Matt and Kelly and Andy for the presentations tonight to give everybody an overview of the Western Everglades Restoration Project. So now it's time for your set. It's time to hear from the public. So it's extremely